Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's episode of Tooth Teacher Tuesday. I hope everyone had a blessed Easter for those celebrating. And on today's episode of Oral Pathology Corner, kind of like to connect the dots here to the theme of Easter. For those of us who celebrate Easter and know what Easter is about, it's about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And Jesus was, of course, famous for many things, but among those things he was famous for was healing people with various different illnesses, including the blind, the deaf, and the mute. And so, to connect it to today's topic is something called Ankyloglossia, which is just a long, fancy scientific word for a tongue tie. And I think many of us are familiar with a tongue tie. It's, like the name suggests, where the band of tissue that holds the tongue to the floor of the mouth is just a little bit more pronounced, a little bit stronger, and therefore it kind of limits the movement of the tongue, kind of tethers it to the floor of the mouth. And so it's going to look something like this. And so the concern with any kind of tongue tie is primarily not necessarily muteness, of course, but definitely going to limit the ability of someone to speak. Typically, folks with tongue ties are going to be more likely to have lisps or other types of speech impediments that is going to make it hard for them to talk. That's certainly the most noticeable detriment of a tongue tie, but there are other detriments as well. Another one being able to properly eat and function with your food intake. Even with newborns, that are nursing, limited movement of the tongue is going to make it hard for them to nurse, but for all of us, the tongue is a very important part of our ability to properly chew and move our food through our digestive tract. So a tongue tie is going to make it difficult to properly chew our food as well. And then also, another downside of having a tongue tie is folks with tongue ties typically are at much higher risk for sleep apnea, which is going to cause a whole host of other issues. Because with the tongue tie, when they're trying to sleep at night, because the tongue has limited ability to move, they have a harder time moving the tongue out of the way to open up their airways, and thus they tend to have very restricted airways, which is going to contribute to the sleep apnea. And as many of us know, and as I've talked in the past, sleep apnea is going to lead to a whole host of other health issues, not only from a dental standpoint with, being more prone to clenching or grinding or breaking, shifting of teeth, and troubles with, the jaw joints, your TMJs, or your chewing muscles being tight and tensed and strained, but then also, systemic health issues that arise from sleep apnea, higher blood pressure, higher blood sugar, so on and so forth. So, all that being said, tongue tie is, seems pretty simple, but it can lead to some serious problems. And so fortunately, the fix for that is very simple as well. It's just a simple matter of performing a frenectomy, which is just the fancy word for cutting the band under the tongue to free the tongue up a little bit more so it's not as tethered to the floor of the mouth. And if you're anything like me, when you think of having a tongue tie cut, you probably think of this fine gentleman That is, of course, Gene Simmons, who's famously had his tongue tie completely removed, kind of to the extreme that, you know, he's got plenty of movement of his tongue. Um, that's not the typical outcome, though, when a tongue tie is addressed. Usually, that's again, that's kind of an extreme example. But so yeah, very routine, straightforward procedure though to deal with a tongue tie, and huge improvement in quality of life when it's performed. So that, in a nutshell, is what you need to know about tongue ties. I hope this was helpful. Again, coming full circle, I hope everybody had a great Easter and is having a great start to their spring. And I hope that you will tune in next week for next week's episode of Tooth Teacher Tuesday. Have a great week.